The autumn rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Beaumont Industries headquarters in downtown Chicago, casting long shadows across the mahogany-paneled boardroom. Eleanor Beaumont, 72, sat at the head of the massive conference table, her steel-gray eyes surveying the quarterly reports with the cold precision that had built her family's empire over 4 decades. "The numbers are exceptional, as always," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been denied anything. "Our pharmaceutical division alone netted $2.8 billion this quarter." Her son, Marcus, 45, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Despite his expensive suit and practiced smile, there was something hollow in his eyes, the look of a man who had inherited wealth but never earned respect. "Mother, there's something we need to discuss about the FDA approval process for our new arthritis medication. Double quotes, not now, Marcus." Eleanor's tone was sharp enough to cut glass. She turned to her daughter-in-law, Victoria, a sharp-featured woman of 38, whose ambition was as transparent as her desperation to secure her place in the family hierarchy. "Victoria, what's the status on the Detroit housing development?" Victoria's smile was perfectly rehearsed. "We've successfully acquired 80% of the properties in the targeted area. The remaining holdouts, well, they're being encouraged to sell through various means." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Nothing illegal, of course. Just persistent." Outside, the Chicago skyline stretched endlessly, a testament to American capitalism and ambition. But inside this room, something far more sinister was at play. The Beaumont family had built their fortune not just through shrewd business decisions, but through a web of corruption, intimidation, and calculated ruthlessness that stretched from City Hall to Capitol Hill. Eleanor's youngest son, David, 35, sat quietly at the far end of the table. Unlike his older brother, David had always been the family's conscience, or what passed for one in a family that had long ago traded morality for money. His hands trembled slightly as he reviewed a particular file, his face growing paler with each page. "David, you look like you've seen a ghost," Eleanor observed, her voice carrying a note of concern that was more calculating than caring. "What's troubling you?" David looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and disgust. "Mother, these reports from our pharmaceutical trials, the side effects we're not reporting to the FDA, people are dying." The room fell silent, except for the steady rhythm of rain against glass. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "David," she said slowly, "we've had this conversation before. Business is not for the weak-hearted. Our medications have helped millions of people worldwide. If a few statistical anomalies occur during the testing phase, that's simply the cost of progress." "Statistical anomalies?" David's voice cracked with emotion. "Mother, we're talking about 17 deaths that we've covered up, 17 families who will never know why their loved ones died." Marcus leaned forward, his face flushed with anger. "David, you're being dramatic. This is how the industry works. Every pharmaceutical company has acceptable risk parameters." "Acceptable to whom?" David stood up, his chair scraping against the polished floor. "To the families of those 17 people, to the thousands more who will take this medication once it's approved." Victoria placed a perfectly manicured hand on the table, her voice smooth as silk but cold as winter. "David, your emotional attachment to these situations is admirable, but it's also impractical. We have shareholders to consider, employees to pay, and a legacy to maintain." Eleanor watched this exchange with the detached interest of a chess master observing her pieces. At 72, she had survived the deaths of 2 husbands, countless business rivalries, and more than one federal investigation. She had not built a multi-billion-dollar empire by allowing sentiment to cloud her judgment. "David," she said finally, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you have 2 choices. You can continue to be part of this family and accept the responsibilities that come with that privilege, or you can choose to be an outsider, but you cannot be both." The ultimatum hung in the air like a blade. David looked around the table at his family, his mother, whose love had always been conditional on compliance, his brother, whose soul had been sold so long ago he'd forgotten its original price, and his sister-in-law, whose hunger for status had made her more ruthless than any of them. "I need some air," David said quietly, gathering his files. "This meeting is suffocating me." As he walked toward the door, Eleanor's voice followed him. "David, the files stay here." He paused, his hand on the door handle. For a moment, it seemed like he might turn back, might submit to the family's will. One more time. Instead, he clutched the files tighter to his chest. "No, Mother, these files contain the truth about what we've done. And the truth belongs to more than just the Beaumont family." The door closed behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo through the room like a gunshot. Eleanor sat in silence for a long moment, her fingers steepled in front of her face. "Victoria," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "make some calls. I want to know where David goes, who he talks to, and what he does with those files. Of course, Eleanor, should I be discreet about it?" Eleanor's smile was as cold as the autumn rain still falling outside. "My dear, we've always been discreet. That's how we've survived this long. As the meeting adjourned, none of them noticed the small recording device that had been planted under the conference table 3 days earlier by a young woman named Sarah Chen, an investigative journalist who had been tracking the Beaumont family's activities for over a year, 3 blocks away, in a modest apartment above a Chinese restaurant. Sarah sat hunched over her laptop, transcribing every word she had just heard. Her investigation into the Beaumont family had started as a routine expose on corporate corruption, but it had quickly become something far more dangerous. She had evidence of bribery, witness intimidation, environmental cover-ups, and now, pharmaceutical fraud that had cost lives. But what she didn't know was that her investigation had already been discovered, and that the Beaumont family was preparing to protect their empire at any cost. As Sarah typed, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or you'll find yourself in a hole you can't climb out of." She stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it and continued typing. Some stories were too important to abandon, even when they came with a price. Outside her window, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets of Chicago clean, while the city's darkest secrets remained buried in boardrooms and bank accounts, waiting for someone brave enough to bring them to light. The Beaumont empire had been built on shadows, but shadows could only exist in the absence of light. Sarah Chen was about to shine a very bright light indeed. The Northwestern University Library had always been Sarah Chen's sanctuary. At 28, she had spent countless hours in these stacks during her journalism degree, and now, 5 years into her career, she found herself returning to the same worn wooden tables when she needed to think clearly. Spread before her were months of research, financial records obtained through FOIA requests, hospital reports she'd acquired through carefully cultivated sources, and a growing web of connections that painted a picture of systematic corruption spanning 3 decades. "You look like you haven't slept in days," a voice said behind her. Sarah turned to see her former professor, Dr. Robert Martinez, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the campus cafe. At 55, Martinez had the weathered look of a man who had seen too much during his years as an investigative journalist before transitioning to academia. "Because I haven't," Sarah admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "This story is consuming me, Dr. Martinez. Every time I think I've found the bottom of it, I discover another layer." Martinez sat down across from her, his eyes taking in the extensive documentation spread across the table. "Tell me about the Beaumonts. What exactly have you uncovered?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping to ensure their conversation remained private. 3 decades of systematic corruption. They've been bribing FDA officials to fast-track drug approvals, paying off environmental inspectors to ignore toxic waste disposal, and using their political connections to silence anyone who threatens their interests. She pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. "But this is the worst part. Their latest arthritis medication, Flexinol, killed 17 people during clinical trials. The deaths were reported as unrelated complications. But I've traced the patterns: heart failure, stroke, organ shutdown, all in previously healthy individuals within weeks of starting the medication." Martinez whistled low and they covered it up completely. "They've got doctors on their payroll who signed off on falsified death certificates, coroners who ruled the deaths as natural causes, and FDA officials who buried the reports." Sarah's hands shook slightly as she handled the documents. "Dr. Martinez, if this medication gets approved and hits the market, we're talking about potentially thousands of deaths." "Sarah," Martinez said carefully, "investigations like this, they don't just ruin careers, they end lives. Are you prepared for what comes next?" Before Sarah could answer, her phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "Last warning, some secrets are worth killing for." She showed the message to Martinez, whose expression darkened. "Sarah, you need to take this seriously. The Beaumont family has resources most people can't imagine. They're threatening you directly, and I'm getting close to something they're desperate to hide." Sarah's jaw set with determination. "I became a journalist to tell stories that matter. If I walk away from this now, how many people die because I was too scared to do my job?" Martinez studied her for a long moment. "If you're determined to pursue this, you need to be smarter about it. No more working alone, no more keeping all your evidence in one place, and definitely no more walking around Chicago by yourself after dark." "What are you suggesting?" "I still have contacts at the Tribune. Let me make some calls, see if we can get you some backup on this story. In the meantime, you need to make copies of everything and store them in multiple locations." And Sarah ... He paused, his expression grave. "You need to assume they're watching you." As if summoned by his words, Sarah noticed a man in a dark suit, standing near the library entrance, speaking quietly into a phone while his eyes remained fixed on their table. When he realized she was looking at him, he turned and walked away. "Dr. Martinez," Sarah whispered, "I think we need to leave now." They gathered her research quickly, stuffing documents into her laptop bag with practiced efficiency. As they headed toward the library's rear exit, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed her editor's name. "Sarah, where are you?" Her editor, Tom Harrison, sounded agitated. "I'm at Northwestern. Why get to the office immediately? We need to talk about your Beaumont investigation." "Tom, What's wrong? You sound just get here. And Sarah, don't talk to anyone else about this story until we meet. The line went dead. Sarah looked at Martinez, who had heard enough of the conversation to understand that something had changed. They got to your editor, he said grimly. How is that possible? Tom's been my advocate on this story from the beginning. Money talks. Sarah and the Beaumonts have more money than most small countries. They exited through the library's back door into the crisp October air. The campus was bustling with students heading to evening classes, their laughter and conversations a stark contrast to the dark reality Sarah was uncovering. What do I do now? She asked, feeling suddenly isolated in a way she'd never experienced. Before Martinez pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. I'm calling someone who can help. Detective Linda Walsh, Chicago PD. She's been investigating corporate corruption for years, and she's one of the few cops in this city who can't be bought. While Martinez made his call, Sarah found herself scanning the campus for any sign of surveillance. The man in the dark suit was nowhere to be seen, but she had the uncomfortable feeling that eyes were still watching her every move. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Meeting moved to Millennium Park, near the Bean, 8 p.m. Come alone. Sarah showed the message to Martinez, who was just finishing his call. That's not your editor, he said immediately. Tom Harrison has been battling pneumonia for the past week. He's been working from home, barely able to get out of bed. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. Someone was impersonating her editor, trying to isolate her in a public place after dark. The Beaumont family wasn't just threatening her, they were actively hunting her. Detective Walsh will meet us at her precinct in 20 minutes, Martinez said. She's going to put you in protective custody while we figure out how to proceed with this investigation. As they walked quickly toward Martinez's car, Sarah's mind raced. She had stumbled onto something far more dangerous than corporate corruption. The Beaumont family was operating like an organized crime syndicate, with resources and connections that reached into every level of government and law enforcement. But she had one advantage they didn't know about. The recording device she had planted in their boardroom was still active, still transmitting every conversation to a secure server she had set up in a data center across town. Dr. Martinez, she said as they reached his car, before we go to the police, there's something I need to retrieve. Evidence that could bring down the entire Beaumont empire. Sarah, it's too dangerous. Whatever evidence you have, it's not worth your life. She looked back at the Northwestern campus, where she had first learned about the power of journalism to expose truth and seek justice. In a few hours, her life had transformed from that of a dedicated reporter pursuing a story to that of a target, running for her life. Some stories choose you, she said quietly, repeating something Martinez had told her years ago. I didn't choose to investigate the Beaumonts, but now that I know what they've done, I have a responsibility to stop them. As they drove toward the police station, neither of them noticed the black sedan that had been following them since they left the library, or the man inside who was already making plans to ensure that Sarah Chun's investigation would end before it could destroy the Beaumont family's carefully constructed empire. The game of cat and mouse had begun, and the stakes couldn't be higher. David Beaumont sat in his Mercedes in the parking garage of Chicago General Hospital, staring at the folder in his hands. Inside were the medical records of Maria Santos, a 34-year-old mother of two who had died 3 weeks ago during the trials. The official cause of death was listed as complications from pre-existing conditions, but David knew the truth. Maria had been perfectly healthy when she enrolled in the trial. She needed the money. The Beaumont Pharmaceutical Division paid participants $2,000 for completing the 6-week program. What she didn't know was that she was participating in a trial where the safety data was being systematically falsified. David's phone buzzed. A text from his wife. Jennifer, kids are asking when you'll be home for dinner. Everything okay? He stared at the message, unable to find words that could explain what he was feeling. How could he tell his wife that his family's fortune was built on the deaths of people like Maria Santos? How could he face his children, knowing that their privileged lifestyle was funded by blood money? Another text appeared, this one from Marcus. Mother wants to see you. Family meeting at the estate. 7 p.m. Don't be late. David closed his eyes and leaned back against the leather seat. The Beaumont estate in Lake Forest had been his childhood home, a sprawling mansion on 40 acres of manicured grounds. As a child, he had thought it was a castle, a magical place where his family reigned as benevolent royalty. Now he understood it was more like a fortress, designed to keep the outside world from seeing the darkness within that 7 p.m. sharp. David walked through the front door of the estate. The familiar scent of his mother's expensive perfume and the sound of classical music drifting from the drawing room created a sense of déjà vu that made his stomach turn. Eleanor was waiting in her favorite chair, a crystal glass of aged whiskey in her hand. Marcus and Victoria sat on the sofa across from her, their faces grave with concern. Eleanor's voice was warm but carried an undertone of steel. I'm glad you could join us. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. It is about the files I took from the boardroom. It's about much more than that. Eleanor set down her glass and fixed David with a stare that had intimidated senators and CEOs for decades. It's about a young journalist named Sarah Chen who has been asking questions about our business practices. David felt his blood run cold. What kind of questions? Victoria leaned forward, her voice smooth and calculated. She's been investigating the Flexinol trials. She has access to medical records, financial documents, and most concerning of all, she somehow recorded our board meeting yesterday. How is that possible? Marcus stood up and began pacing, his agitation visible. We found a listening device under the conference table. Professional grade, long-range transmission. This Chen woman has been planning this investigation for months. Eleanor's expression remained calm, but David could see the fury burning in her eyes. David, I need you to understand something. This family has survived for 4 generations by protecting our interests. We've weathered recessions, wars, and government investigations because we've always been willing to do what was necessary. What exactly are you saying, Mother? I'm saying that Sarah Chen represents an existential threat to everything we've built. If her investigation becomes public, we're not just talking about financial losses. We're talking about criminal charges, prison sentences, and the complete destruction of the Beaumont legacy. David looked around the room at his family. His mother, whose ruthless ambition had built an empire but cost her soul. His brother, whose weakness had made him complicit in crimes he was too cowardly to acknowledge. His sister-in-law, whose hunger for status had made her more dangerous than either of them. So what do you propose we do? David asked, though he dreaded the answer. Victoria smiled, and the expression was as cold as winter. We've already taken steps to handle the situation. Sarah Chen has been receiving warnings to stop her investigation. If she continues to ignore them, you're talking about threatening a journalist. We're talking about protecting our family, Marcus said sharply. David, you've always been too soft for this business. But this isn't about business anymore. This is about survival. Eleanor stood up and walked to the window overlooking the estate's gardens. In the gathering dusk, the perfectly maintained grounds looked almost ethereal, like something from a fairy tale. David, she said without turning round, I've made arrangements for you to take an extended vacation, Europe perhaps, Australia. Somewhere far from Chicago and far from this unpleasantness. You're trying to get me out of the way. I'm trying to protect you, and I'm trying to protect this family from your conscience, which has always been more of a liability than an asset. David felt something snap inside him. For 35 years he had tried to be the son his mother wanted, tried to find a way to reconcile his values with his family's methods. But there was no reconciliation possible between right and wrong. No, he said quietly. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Eleanor turned around slowly, her expression unreadable. Excuse me, I said no. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to let you destroy Sarah Chen or anyone else who threatens to expose what we've done. Marcus stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. David, you're being incredibly naive. Do you think this journalist cares about you? Do you think she won't destroy you along with the rest of us? Maybe she should. The words came out before David could stop them, but once spoken, he realized they expressed exactly how he felt. Maybe it was time for the Beaumont family to face the consequences of their actions. Victoria's laugh was like broken glass. David, you sound like you're having a crisis of conscience. How noble, how completely useless. Eleanor walked back to her chair and sat down, her movements deliberate and controlled. David, you have 24 hours to reconsider your position. After that, you'll be considered a hostile entity and this family will treat you accordingly. What does that mean? It means that if you choose to align yourself with our enemies, you'll be treated like an enemy. Your trust fund will be frozen. Your position in the company will be terminated, and your access to this family will be permanently revoked. David looked around the room one more time. These people shared his blood, but they were strangers too. They had chosen power over principles, wealth over honor, and now they were asking him to make the same choice. I need those files back, David, Eleanor said quietly. The ones you took from the boardroom. They contain information that could destroy innocent people. Innocent people. David's voice rose. Mother, we're responsible for 17 deaths. 17 people who trusted us with their lives. How can you call us innocent? Because we've done what was necessary to help millions of others. Our medications have saved lives. Our business practices have provided jobs. And our success has contributed to the economic prosperity of this country. If a few people had to die for that greater good. Listen to yourself, David said, backing toward the door. You're talking like a sociopath. Eleanor's mask finally slipped, revealing the cold fury beneath. I'm talking like a survivor, which is something you've never had to be, thanks to the empire I built for you. David reached the door and turned back one last time. I won't give you the files, Mother, and I won't let you destroy Sarah Chen. Then you've chosen your side, Eleanor said quietly. I hope you're prepared for the consequences. As David drove away from the estate, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Jennifer's name. David, where are you? The kids are worried. I'm coming home, he said, and for the first time in weeks he meant it. Jennifer, I need to tell you something important about my family, about what we've done. David, you're scaring me. I'm scared too, but I'm done being part of something that's fundamentally evil. As he drove through the dark streets of Lake Forest, David realized that he had just declared war on his own family. They had unlimited resources, powerful connections, and absolutely no moral constraints on their actions. But he had something they didn't: the truth. And sometimes the truth was enough to bring down an empire behind him at the Beaumont estate. Eleanor was already making phone calls, setting in motion a plan that would either save her family's legacy or destroy anyone who threatened it. The war for the soul of the Beaumont family had begun. Detective Linda Walsh had seen her share of corporate corruption cases, but nothing had prepared her for the evidence Sarah Chen spread across her desk at the 18th District Police Station. At 45, Walsh had built her reputation on meticulous investigation and an unwillingness to be intimidated by wealth or power. "This is extensive," Walsh said, examining the financial records and medical documents, "but building a case against the Beaumont family isn't going to be easy. They have lawyers, political connections, and more money than some countries." Sarah sat across from her, exhaustion evident in her eyes but determination still burning bright. "Detective, we're talking about multiple felonies. Fraud, bribery, conspiracy, and potentially murder if we can prove they knowingly covered up those deaths." Dr. Martinez, who had insisted on staying for the meeting, leaned forward. "Linda, what kind of protection can you offer Sarah? She's been receiving direct threats." Before Walsh could answer, her phone rang. The caller ID showed the number for the Chicago Police Superintendent's office. "Detective Walsh, this is Superintendent Morrison. I need you to halt any investigation involving the Beaumont family immediately." "Sir, with respect, I have evidence of serious criminal activity, Detective. This is not a request. Close whatever file you have on the Beaumonts and redirect your attention to other cases." "That's an order." The line went dead. Walsh stared at her phone, then looked at Sarah and Martinez. "They got to your boss too," Martinez said grimly. Jaw tightened. In 20 years on the force, she had never been ordered to ignore evidence of criminal activity. The fact that the order came from the superintendent himself told her everything she needed to know about the Beaumont family's reach. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I can't officially investigate this case, but unofficially I can make sure you have protection and help you find someone who can act on this evidence through the FBI. Corporate corruption that crosses state lines falls under federal jurisdiction. I have a contact there, Agent Rebecca Torres. She's clean, and she's been looking for a case like this for years." As Walsh reached for her phone to make the call, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Your parents' house in Evanston. Pretty neighborhood. Would hate to see anything happen to it." Sarah's face went white. "They're threatening my family now." Martinez grabbed the phone and read the message. "Sarah, you need to call your parents immediately." With shaking hands, Sarah dialed her parents' number. Her mother answered on the second ring. "Mom, are you and Dad okay?" "Of course we're okay, sweetheart. Why would you ask that?" "I need you and Dad to leave the house immediately. Go to a hotel, use cash, and don't tell anyone where you're going." "Sarah, you're frightening me. What's going on?" "Mom, please, I can't explain right now, but you're in danger because of a story I'm working on. Please, just do what I'm asking." After convincing her parents to leave their home, Sarah turned back to Walsh and Martinez. "This is escalating too quickly. They're not just threatening me anymore." Walsh's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed the number for Agent Torres. "Linda, I just got a call from Quantico. There's been a development in a case I've been working. A whistleblower named David Beaumont reached out through an attorney. He wants to cooperate with a federal investigation." Sarah's eyes widened. "David Beaumont, one of the family members?" Walsh nodded, then spoke into the phone. "Rebecca, I have a journalist here with evidence that might be related to your case. Sarah Chen. She's been investigating the Beaumont family for months. Bring her in tonight. And Linda, ... be careful. I've been getting pressure from Washington to back off this investigation too." An hour later, Sarah found herself in a windowless conference room at the FBI's Chicago field office, facing Agent Rebecca Torres, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s with the bearing of someone who had built her career on taking down powerful criminals. "Ms. Chen, I understand you have evidence of criminal activity by the Beaumont family." Sarah opened her laptop and began displaying the evidence she had collected. Financial records showing bribery of government officials, medical documents proving they covered up deaths during drug trials, and audio recordings of them planning to intimidate witnesses. Agent Torres reviewed the materials, her expression growing more serious with each document. "This is substantial, but I need to tell you something about David Beaumont's cooperation." "What about it?" "He contacted us 3 hours ago through his attorney. He was willing to testify against his family in exchange for immunity. But an hour ago he was found dead in his car in the parking garage of his apartment building." Sarah felt the room spin around her. "Dead? How apparent suicide? Single gunshot to the head, gun found in his hand, note left on the dashboard apologizing for the family's crimes." "That's not suicide," Sarah said immediately. "That's murder made to look like suicide." "I agree, but proving it will be difficult." The scene was processed by Chicago PD and the preliminary report supports the suicide theory. Martinez, who had been listening in silence, spoke up. The same police department that was ordered to halt their investigation of the Beaumont. Agent Torres nodded grimly. David Beaumont's death changes everything. He was our best chance for insider testimony. Without him, you still have my evidence. Sarah interrupted. And I have more. I've been recording their conversations for weeks, which may not be admissible in court, depending on how you obtained them. Sarah realized that David Beaumont's murder, and she was certain it was murder, had eliminated the federal government's most valuable witness while simultaneously sending a message to anyone else who might consider cooperating. Agent Torres, she said, what happens now? Now we keep you alive while we build a case that can stand up in court. But I need you to understand something, Miss Chen. The Beaumont family has just demonstrated that they're willing to kill their own family members to protect their secrets. They won't hesitate to kill you. As if summoned by her words, Torres' phone rang. The caller ID showed the number of the FBI director's office in Washington. Agent Torres, this is Director Hamilton. I'm calling to inform you that the investigation into Beaumont Industries is being transferred to a joint task force. You're being reassigned effective immediately. Sir, I have a witness who needs protection. The witness protection will be handled by the task force. Clean out your desk and report to the field office in Miami tomorrow morning. The line went dead. Torres stared at her phone, then looked at Sarah with a mixture of anger and fear. They're shutting down the investigation, she said quietly, and they're getting rid of anyone who might continue it. Sarah felt a crushing sense of despair. Every official channel she had tried to use had been corrupted or compromised. The police, the FBI, even her own newspaper, the Beaumont family's influence reached everywhere. What do I do now? She asked. Martinez stood up, his face set with determination. We go public. We put everything online, send it to every news outlet in the country, and make it impossible for them to contain the story. They'll kill me before I can get it published. Then we make sure you're somewhere they can't find you, Torres said. I may be off the case officially, but I still have contacts. People who care more about justice than politics. As they prepared to leave the FBI building, Sarah's phone buzzed with one final message. David Beaumont chose poorly. Don't make the same mistake. Looking at the message, Sarah realized that David Beaumont had died because he had tried to do the right thing. The question now was whether she would have the courage to follow his example, knowing that it might cost her everything. The Beaumont family had drawn a line in the sand with David's blood. Sarah Chen was about to cross it. Sarah Chen crouched in the abandoned warehouse on Chicago's south side, her laptop balanced precariously on a stack of wooden crates. The building had been empty for 3 years, since the manufacturing company that owned it had moved operations overseas. It was the perfect hiding place, off the grid, forgotten, and most importantly, invisible to the surveillance network the Beaumont family had deployed to find her. Dr. Martinez kept watch by the broken window while Sarah worked frantically to upload the evidence to multiple news outlets and social media platforms. They had been moving from location to location for the past 18 hours, staying ahead of the hunters who were closing in on them. How much longer? Martinez whispered, his eyes scanning the empty street below. Almost done. I'm uploading everything to WikiLeaks, sending copies to the New York Times, Washington Post, and The Guardian. Even if they catch me, the story will get out. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, driven by a mixture of determination and desperation. David Beaumont's death had shown her exactly what she was up against, but it had also strengthened her resolve. If she was going to die for this story, she was going to make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. Her phone buzzed. Another message, from the unknown number. Warehouse District, South Side. You're running out of places to hide. Sarah's blood ran cold. They had found her again. Dr. Martinez, we need to go now. As they gathered their equipment, the sound of car engines echoed through the empty streets. Sarah peered through the window and saw 3 black sedans pulling up to the warehouse, their occupants moving with military precision. Back exit, Martinez whispered, leading her toward the rear of the building. They slipped out through a loading dock that opened onto an alley filled with abandoned shopping carts and debris. The smell of decay and desperation hung in the air, a reminder of how far Chicago's industrial sector had fallen. This way, Martinez led her toward a maze of abandoned buildings and vacant lots that stretched for several blocks. If they could reach the main street, they might be able to disappear into the crowd. Behind them, the sound of boots on concrete grew closer. Their pursuers weren't bothering with stealth anymore. They knew their quarry was trapped. Sarah Chen, a voice called out from behind them. My name is Vincent Carver. I work for the Beaumont family. We need to talk. Sarah and Martinez pressed themselves against the wall of an abandoned auto parts store, trying to remain invisible in the shadows. Miss Chen, you're making this much more difficult than it needs to be. The Beaumont family is prepared to offer you a substantial sum of money to end your investigation, enough to set you up for life. The voice was getting closer. Sarah could hear at least 3 sets of footsteps, spreading out to cover all possible escape routes. Think about it, Miss Chen. You could take the money and disappear. Start a new life somewhere far from Chicago. Or you can continue running until we catch you, and then The voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Martinez motioned for Sarah to follow him deeper into the maze of abandoned buildings. They moved as quietly as possible, but the broken glass and debris made stealth nearly impossible. Alternatively, Carver's voice continued, now coming from a different direction, you could end up like David Beaumont. Such a tragedy, a young man driven to suicide by the weight of his family's sins. They reached the end of the alley and found themselves facing a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Behind them, the footsteps were getting closer. Over here, Martinez whispered, pointing to a section of the fence where the wire had been cut, likely by homeless individuals seeking shelter. They squeezed through the gap, Sarah's jacket catching on the metal and tearing. On the other side, they found themselves in another industrial wasteland, a graveyard of Chicago's manufacturing past. Rusted machinery and collapsed buildings stretched as far as they could see in the dim streetlight. Miss Chen, Carver's voice called out again, now with a note of impatience. You have something that belongs to the Beaumont family. Those recordings, those documents, they represent privileged information that was obtained illegally. Sarah and Martinez crouched behind an overturned delivery truck, its sides riddled with bullet holes from gang activity years earlier. Sarah checked her phone. The uploads were at 87% completion. Just a few more minutes, she whispered. We don't have a few more minutes, Martinez replied, pointing toward the fence they had just climbed through. Flashlight beams were cutting through the darkness, systematically searching every hiding spot. There's another way, Sarah said suddenly. My contact at the Tribune, Tom Harrison. He may have been compromised, but his assistant Maria Gonzalez, she's clean. If I can get the story to her. She pulled out a second phone, a burner she had purchased that morning, and quickly typed out a message with the location of the uploaded files. The sound of footsteps on gravel was getting closer. They could hear Carver speaking to his men, coordinating their search pattern. We need a distraction, Martinez said. He picked up a piece of broken concrete and hurled it toward the far end of the lot. The crash echoed through the empty space, and immediately they heard footsteps rushing toward the sound. Sarah and Martinez moved in the opposite direction, using the distraction to put more distance between themselves and their hunters. They reached another fence, this one surrounding an active construction site. Construction site means security cameras, Sarah said. And security cameras mean we'll be visible, but it also means witnesses if something happens to us, Martinez replied. Sometimes visibility is the best protection. They climbed over the fence and dropped into the construction site. The partially completed building rose 12 stories above them, its skeleton of steel and concrete creating a maze of shadows and hiding places. Sarah's phone chimed softly. The uploads had completed successfully. The evidence was now in the hands of journalists around the world. It's done, she told Martinez. Whatever happens now, the story is out there. But their celebration was short-lived. The construction sites. Security lights suddenly blazed to life, illuminating the entire area like daylight. They had triggered motion sensors. Run, Martinez said. They sprinted toward the building's entrance. But before they could reach it, Carver and his men appeared, from multiple directions, having used the same fence to enter the site. Enough games, Ms. Chen, Carver said, his voice calm despite the chase. He was a tall man in his 50s, with the bearing of former military. You've caused the Beaumont family considerable trouble, but it ends here. Two men flanked him, both carrying weapons that they kept discreetly concealed but clearly visible. The story's already been published, Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Killing me won't stop it now. Carver smiled, and the expression was more terrifying than any threat. Miss Chen, you underestimate the Beaumont family's resources. We've been monitoring your activities for hours. Your uploads were intercepted and corrupted before they could be properly transmitted. As for your message to Maria Gonzalez, he held up a phone. We've been reading your texts in real time. Sarah felt her heart sink. They had been one step ahead of her the entire time. However, Carver continued, the family is still prepared to be reasonable. $1 million cash, in exchange for all copies of your evidence and your agreement to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And if I refuse, then you'll suffer an unfortunate accident, perhaps a fall from this construction site. Very tragic, but these places can be dangerous at night. Martinez stepped forward, positioning himself between Sarah and Carver's men. You're talking about murdering a journalist in cold blood. I'm talking about protecting legitimate business interests from industrial espionage, Carver replied smoothly. Miss Chen obtained confidential information through illegal means. The Beaumont family is simply defending itself. Sarah looked around the construction site, calculating distances and escape routes. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but she wasn't ready to give up. I need proof that the uploads were really corrupted, she said, playing for time. Carver nodded to one of his men who produced a tablet and showed her the error messages from her upload attempts. The files had been blocked by sophisticated cybersecurity measures she hadn't even known existed. The Beaumont family has been in business for 4 generations. Miss Chen, we didn't survive this long by leaving things to chance. As Carver spoke, Sarah noticed movement in the shadows of the building above them. Someone was on the 3rd floor, watching the confrontation below. Dr. Martinez, she whispered, when I say run, head for the building. Sarah, what are you planning? Before she could answer, a new voice cut through the night air. Chicago Police, drop your weapons. Detective Linda Walsh emerged from behind a concrete barrier, her service weapon drawn and pointed at Carver's men. Behind her, 2 other officers took positions with clear lines of sight. Detective Walsh, Carver said calmly, not seeming surprised by her appearance. I believe you've been ordered to stay away from Beaumont family business. I've been ordered to halt an investigation, Walsh replied, but I haven't been ordered to ignore a kidnapping in progress. This is a private business discussion, with guns drawn on unarmed civilians. I don't think so. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Sarah could see Carver calculating his options, weighing the risk of violence against the potential exposure. Finally, he lowered his hands and signaled to his men to do the same. Miss Chen, he said, this conversation isn't over. The Beaumont family has a long memory and unlimited patience. As Carver and his men retreated into the darkness, Walsh approached Sarah and Martinez. Are you two all right? How did you find us? Sarah asked. I've been following them since they started following you, Walsh replied. I may not be able to officially investigate the Beaumonts, but I can still protect witnesses. Detective, they've corrupted my uploads. The evidence isn't getting out. Walsh smiled grimly. Actually, it is. While you were uploading decoy files, Agent Torres has been working with journalists in 3 different countries. The real evidence is being published tomorrow morning by The Guardian, The Times, and Le Monde simultaneously. Sarah stared at her in amazement. How is that possible? Because while the Beaumont family was busy chasing you around Chicago, we were building a case that they can't stop, buy, or intimidate into silence. As they left the construction site under police protection, Sarah realized that the game had changed once again. The hunters had become the hunted, and tomorrow, the world would finally see the true face of the Beaumont Empire. But she also knew that the most dangerous part was yet to come. Cornered animals were unpredictable, and the Beaumont family had just been backed into a corner with no way out. The newsroom of the Chicago Tribune had never seen chaos like this. At 6 a.m., 3 hours before the international publication of Sarah Chun's investigation, the building was surrounded by protesters, federal agents, and news crews from around the world. Inside, Editor-in-Chief Patricia Williams stood at the center of the storm, coordinating with newspapers in London and Paris while fielding calls from Washington. The White House is requesting that we delay publication pending a national security review, Williams announced to the room full of journalists and lawyers. Sarah, who had spent the night in protective custody, looked up from her desk who was making final revisions to the story. National security. We're talking about corporate fraud, not state secrets. The Beaumont family has contracts with the Pentagon, Williams replied. Their pharmaceutical division produces medications for military personnel overseas. The administration is claiming that exposing the company's practices could endanger troops. Dr. Martinez, who had been serving as an unofficial advisor to the Tribune's legal team, shook his head in disgust. It's a delay tactic. They're buying time for the Beaumonts to destroy evidence or flee the country, which is why we're not delaying, Williams said firmly. The Guardian goes live in London in 1 hour. We go live simultaneously. Across town, the Beaumont estate had become a fortress under siege. News crews lined the perimeter of the property, their satellite trucks creating a small city of media equipment. Inside the mansion, Eleanor Beaumont sat in her study, surrounded by lawyers, crisis management specialists, and the remnants of her empire. The preliminary injunctions have all been denied, her chief attorney, David Sterling, reported. Federal judges in 3 districts have refused to block publication. Marcus paced the room like a caged animal, his usual composure completely shattered. How is this possible? We own half the judges in this state. Federal judges can't be bought as easily as local ones, Victoria replied, her voice sharp with recrimination. I told you we should have handled this differently from the beginning. Eleanor remained silent, staring out the window at the army of reporters gathering outside her home. At 72, she had weathered many storms, but this one felt different. This one felt final. Mrs. Beaumont, Sterling continued. The Justice Department has unsealed federal indictments. Charges include conspiracy, fraud, bribery, and he paused, his voice dropping, accessory to murder in the death of David Beaumont. The room fell silent. Even in their darkest moments, none of them had expected murder charges. Based on what evidence? Eleanor asked quietly. David's attorney came forward with a recording of a phone conversation David made the night before his death. He explicitly stated that he feared for his life and that if anything happened to him, it wouldn't be suicide. Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face his mother. You knew about this recording. I knew David was weak, Eleanor replied coldly. I didn't know he was prescient. Victoria stood up abruptly, her face pale. This is over. The company is finished. Our assets will be frozen, and we're all going to prison. No one is going to prison, Eleanor said with a quiet authority that had built her empire. Sterling, what are our options? Very limited. The evidence is overwhelming. The media coverage will be devastating. And with David's recording, he spread his hands helplessly. Mrs. Beaumont, the best outcome we can hope for is plea agreements that might reduce the sentences. Unacceptable. Eleanor stood up and walked to her safe, retrieving a folder that contained documents she had hoped never to use. Inside were detailed records of every bribe, every favor, every piece of leverage she had accumulated over 4 decades of ruthless business practices. "Sterling, I want you to contact the following people," she said, reading from a list. "Senator Hamilton, Judge Morrison, FBI Director Collins, and Governor Peterson. Tell them that if they don't intervene in this matter immediately, certain information about their past associations with our family will become public." "Mrs. Beaumont, that's blackmail of federal officials." It's survival," she interrupted. "And it's how this family has always operated." As her attorney reluctantly began making calls, Eleanor's phone rang. The caller ID showed Sarah Chen's number. "Ms. Chen," Eleanor answered, her voice perfectly controlled. "I assume you're calling to gloat." "Actually, Mrs. Beaumont, I'm calling to give you a chance to tell your side of the story. The article goes live in 30 minutes. If you want to provide a statement, my statement is simple. Ms. Chen, you have destroyed a family business that has contributed billions to the American economy and saved millions of lives worldwide. History will judge which of us was the villain. History will also judge which of us was responsible for 17 unnecessary deaths," Sarah replied. "Mrs. Beaumont, your son David died trying to do the right thing. It's not too late for you to honor his memory." Eleanor looked around the room at her remaining family. Marcus, whose weakness had made him a liability. Victoria, whose ambition that had made her dangerous, and David, whose conscience had made him a traitor. "Miss Chen, my son David was naive about the realities of business. The world is not a place for the weak-hearted, maybe not, but it's also not a place for people who value money more than human life." The line went dead. Eleanor set down the phone and turned to face her family. "Pack what you can carry. We're leaving the country tonight. Mother, they'll be watching the airports, not all of them. We have a private jet fueled and waiting at a small airfield in Wisconsin. From there, we go to Switzerland, where we have accounts that can't be touched by U.S. authorities." Victoria looked uncertain. "What about the company?" "Our assets here. The company is finished, but we still have over $2 billion in offshore accounts, enough to start over somewhere else." As the Beaumont family began their final preparations to flee, Sarah Chen was putting the finishing touches on the story that would destroy their empire. The article was comprehensive, devastating, and irrefutable. It detailed decades of corruption, documented the cover-up of the Flexinol deaths, and included audio recordings of the family planning to intimidate witnesses. 30 seconds. Williams announced. Sarah looked around the newsroom at the faces of her colleagues. These were people who had dedicated their lives to uncovering the truth, often at great personal cost. Today, they were about to publish a story that would bring down one of the most powerful families in America. "Publishing now," Williams said, hitting the enter key. Within minutes, the story was being read around the world. Social media exploded. With reactions, stock markets began to react, and politicians who had taken Beaumont money started issuing carefully worded statements distancing themselves from the family. At the Beaumont estate, Eleanor watched the news coverage with grim fascination. The empire she had spent her life building was collapsing in real time, destroyed by a young journalist who had refused to be intimidated. "The cars are ready," Marcus announced, as they prepared to leave the mansion that had been their family home for 3 generations. Eleanor took one last look around the study where she had planned her greatest triumphs and now witnessed her ultimate defeat. "Mother," Victoria said quietly, "what happens now?" Eleanor picked up a photograph of David from her desk, studying the face of the son who had chosen honor over loyalty. "Now we disappear," she said, "and we hope that the world eventually forgets what the Beaumont name once meant." But as they drove away from the estate under cover of darkness, Eleanor knew that some stories never fade from memory. Sarah Chen had ensured that the Beaumont legacy would be one of corruption and death, not wealth and power. The empire was in flames, and there was no coming back from the ashes. 6 months after the publication of Sarah Chen's exposé, the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago had become the center of one of the most watched trials in American history. The Beaumont family's attempted flight to Switzerland had ended in failure when their private jet was intercepted by federal agents at the Wisconsin border. Now Eleanor, Marcus, and Victoria Beaumont sat in orange jumpsuits, listening as prosecutor Amanda Foster outlined the government's case. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Foster began, "over the next several weeks we'll hear evidence of a criminal conspiracy that spanned 3 decades and cost dozens of innocent lives. The defendants systematically corrupted government officials, falsified medical trials, and when their crimes were threatened with exposure, they committed murder." Sarah sat in the gallery, watching the proceedings with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. The Beaumont empire had indeed fallen, but the cost had been enormous. David Beaumont was dead. Maria Santos and 16 other trial participants would never see their families again. and countless others had suffered while the family pursued profit over safety. During the months since the story broke, Sarah had won a Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism, but the recognition felt hollow. Awards couldn't bring back the dead or undo decades of suffering. "Miss Chen," a voice said beside her. She turned to see Dr. Jennifer Beaumont, David's widow, taking a seat in the row behind her. Jennifer had divorced herself from the family name and was now testifying for the prosecution. "How are you holding up?" Sarah asked. "Some days are better than others," Jennifer replied. "The children still ask about their father. I tell them he was a hero who tried to stop something terrible. He was a hero. Without his courage, none of this would have been possible." On the witness stand, Detective Linda Walsh was detailing her investigation into David's death. The evidence was overwhelming. The angle of the gunshot was inconsistent with suicide. David's fingerprints were not on the trigger, and most damning of all, the recording David had made the night before his death. In this recording, Walsh testified, David Beaumont explicitly states his intention to cooperate with federal authorities and his fear that his family would kill him to prevent his testimony. The defense attorney, a high-priced lawyer named Charles Whitman, attempted to discredit the recording, but the evidence was too strong. Audio analysis confirmed the recording's authenticity, and David's lawyer corroborated his client's state of mind. As the trial progressed, witness after witness testified to the Beaumont family's crimes. Dr. Maria Rodriguez, who had worked on the Flexinol trials, described how she had been pressured to falsify safety data. FBI agent Rebecca Torres detailed the family's attempts to corrupt the investigation. Even former employees came forward, describing a culture of intimidation and criminal activity that permeated every level of the organization. Eleanor Beaumont remained stoic throughout the testimony, occasionally whispering to her attorney but showing no emotion as the evidence mounted against her. Marcus, however, was visibly cracking under the pressure, his hands shaking as he listened to recordings of his own voice, planning criminal activities. Victoria had attempted to negotiate a plea deal in exchange for testimony against Eleanor, but the prosecution had enough evidence without her cooperation. Her betrayal of family loyalty had gained her nothing except the contempt of her former allies. The most powerful moment came when Sarah herself took the witness stand. She described her investigation, the threats she had received, and the moment she realized that David Beaumont had been murdered for trying to do the right thing. "Miss Chen," Prosecutor Forster asked, "what drove you to continue this investigation despite the personal danger?" Sarah looked toward the gallery, where families of the Flexinol victims sat watching the proceedings. "I became a journalist to tell stories that matter. When I learned that people were dying because of the Beaumont family's greed, I couldn't walk away. David Beaumont understood that some things are more important than money or power. He died for that belief, and I owe it to him and to all the victims to see that justice is served." During cross-examination, defense attorney Whitman attempted to paint Sarah as a reckless journalist who had destroyed a legitimate business, but her credibility was unshakable. The evidence spoke for itself. The trial lasted 6 weeks. When it ended, the jury deliberated for only 8 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Eleanor Beaumont was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Marcus received 35 years, and Victoria received 25 years as the sentences were read. Eleanor Beaumont's mask finally slipped. For the first time since her arrest, she showed emotion, not remorse, but rage at a world that had dared to hold her accountable for her actions. Outside the courthouse, Sarah found herself surrounded by reporters asking for her reaction to the verdicts. "Justice has been served," she said simply. "But we can't forget that this case represents a systemic failure. The Beaumont family operated with impunity for decades because too many people in positions of authority chose to look the other way. Real change requires more than just punishing the criminals. It requires reforming the system that enabled them." 6 months later, Sarah stood in the cemetery where David Beaumont was buried, placing flowers on his grave. The inscription on his headstone read simply, "David Matthew Beaumont, son, father, and truth-teller. I kept my promise," she said quietly. "Your family can't hurt anyone else." As she walked away from the grave, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The Beaumont empire was gone, its assets seized and distributed to victims' families. New legislation had been passed strengthening oversight of pharmaceutical trials, and, most importantly, 17 families finally knew the truth about why their loved ones had died. Dr. Martinez, who had become a close friend during the investigation, met her at the cemetery entrance. "Any regrets?" he asked. Sarah considered the question. She had lost her job at the newspaper. The Tribune's owner had fired her. Under pressure from advertisers with ties to the Beaumont family, she had received death threats from people who blamed her for destroying jobs and damaging Chicago's reputation. Her personal life had been turned upside down, and she still looked over her shoulder sometimes, wondering if other powerful enemies might be watching. "No regrets," she said finally. "David Beaumont died because he chose to do the right thing. I'd like to think I made the same choice." As they walked away from the cemetery, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from a new source. Another story, another powerful family with secrets to hide. The work was never finished, but that was a story for another day. Today, justice had been served, and the victims of the Beaumont family's greed could finally rest in peace. The Beaumont legacy would live on, but not as Eleanor had intended. Instead of being remembered as builders of an empire, they would be remembered as a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of unchecked power and unlimited greed. And Sarah Chen would be remembered as a journalist who proved that sometimes the truth really is enough to bring down an empire.